Welcome to Your Idaho, brought to you by the Gem State Patriot. My name is Bob Neugebauer, and my guest today is Russ Fulcher, former senator and gubernatorial candidate for the state of Idaho. Um, I'd like to take some time today, Russ, to ask you about what you feel is going on with this refugee program here in Idaho, and whether our legislature and our governor are defending our rights to approve or not approve of refugees moving into the state.
Well, it's Bob, it's kind of the topic of the day, and it's clearly a problem. And the biggest challenge I think we've got is, from a national perspective, we haven't even acknowledged the fact that we're at war, and we are clearly at war. I think at the state level, we're at least acknowledging that. But traditionally, state leaders have not had an active role in dealing with immigration issues, and it shows because there's basically no active state activity that's going on to try to do anything to be a protection or take precaution in case of these situations. So the answer to your question, I think, is unfortunately no, nothing is happening.
So basically what the governor said in his statement and the statement that he sent out to the press was that he is going to do everything in his power legally to stop the immigration of the refugees. But in essence, there is nothing that he can do.
Well, I believe that there is, actually. And sometimes in times of emergency, you need to take some steps that are not being taken today. I think that the state should step forward and enforce some of the laws the federal government is not enforcing. I think the state should step forward and do some of the things that is not being done at the national level that should be. One of those things is to do what the federal government should be doing with background checks. I realize that's not a thorough type of screening process, but nevertheless there are things you can do there. We should be enforcing only American law within the state of Idaho. We're not doing that. We should be going through all of the entitlement reform steps, making sure that we're not encouraging people to come in unduly. I mean, there's a whole host of things that we should be doing, and we're simply not doing them today.
Well, I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that we receive still 36% of our state budget from the federal government. And it doesn't appear that the legislature or the governor would like to have any inflammatory statements come out that the feds would not agree with or like. And that's why I don't think we're seeing an awful lot of action here or an awful lot of resistance as far as I'm concerned. We've seen a lot of rallies, we've seen a lot of protests, we've seen the people out on the streets. But what we don't see, or I have heard rumors that the state house legislature is actually trying to do something about funding for the College of Southern Idaho. Now, I'm not sure what they can do or how they can do it. But I just don't see any action, and there's really not an awful lot of ways they can protect us here. It goes back to the federal government, aside from the governor coming up and say, no, we're not taking them, which I haven't heard from him yet.
Yeah, and I don't think you probably will, but I think in order to deal with this effectively, Bob, you got to kind of proverbially lift the airplane up to about 30,000 feet. You do have to look at this from a national level, and there's two sides of every war, every conflict. We have an offensive side and a defensive side. At the state level, by default, we're here, we're local, we play defense here. But from a national policy perspective, we need to be playing offense too. That means acknowledging that the fact that, yes, we are in a war. That means that, that we do need to take initiatives, not just in my opinion, not just airstrikes, but there does need to be ground troops that are engaged on this whole thing on the offensive side. War is a test of wills. And right now, we have not shown any leadership with any will to take this thing on. And so, by default, here in the state of Idaho and in the other states, the only option that we've got is to play those defensive cards and try to do the things that the federal government is not. And so, any of these policies with refugees and trying to constrain the funding as much as we can, secure our borders as much as we can, those are all steps that we need to take. But quite honestly, this is one of those things you do need to have leadership with at the federal level.
Well, I talked a little bit about that leadership this morning on the radio. This is the 70th anniversary of Pearl Harbor. Now, today, all right, we have a different type of invasion, and it's being taken place under the auspices of our own government. We allow hundreds of thousands of immigrants coming into this country every year, whether they be on HB1 visas or otherwise, who are supposedly checked out and well documented, which they have a history, or supposedly have a history for. However, if you talk to anybody in the echelons of the FBI or Homeland Security at the top level, they'll tell you we have no way of checking all of this out. I mean, it's not like they have a registration for cars in Syria anymore. They don't know where anybody is.
Sure.
And just like the San Bernardino thing took place, that's something that could happen here. And I don't think people understand. We had a bomber here that was caught several years ago.
Yeah, you know, Bob, if I could just, I agree with what you're saying here. And that prompts me to think of one other thing. So the president goes on national TV last night and, among other things, encourages steps on gun control. That is absolutely the wrong direction, in my opinion. If a would-be assassin within the borders of Idaho or the United States is going to kill somebody, they're going to figure out a way to do it, whether it's with a bomb, whether it's with an automobile, whether it's with knives, for crying out loud. They will figure out how to kill people. And so trying to change the gun laws, look at where these things have happened. They've all happened in areas with the most strict gun laws in the country. And so that's not the answer. To the contrary, I think there is something to be said for law-abiding citizens to step forward and have a weapon and know how to use it and procure it legally. And can you imagine if one person at that San Bernardino shooting or any of these others would have been armed?
Could have changed the whole thing.
Could have changed the entire dynamic.
But, you know, that's something that I just had this thought this morning. We're all permitted to carry guns, open carry, here in Idaho. We don't have constitutional carry, which we've been trying to get through for the last 4 or 5 years. The question to me is, legally, we have companies who won't allow you to carry a gun within their premises. What happens if there is an attack on one of these companies within the confines of their building, and they have basically disarmed you if you want to go and shop there? Do they have a liability?
Well, I'm not sure that I can speak to that.
It's a good question, isn't it?
It's a good question, and some of our legal minds would probably need to address that. I think that from a leadership standpoint, what our job is and what our responsibility is, and quite frankly, just from a sheer protection standpoint, those are steps that we need to take. We're in a different world than we were just a few years ago, and that requires a change in strategy.
Well, we're in a different world than we were a week ago, because this is a true terrorist attack. Since 9/11, I mean, they have not, and the president has not admitted that we've had a terrorist attack, even though there have been several. He doesn't want to document them as such. But now he has said we have a terrorist attack. This is a whole different world. And this sheds a whole new light on what's going on here. Although he still wants us, to not go out on the deep end when it comes to the Muslims. All we're saying, I think the people of this country have been very, very understanding, not just with 9/11, but of the things that are going on currently. There has not been an enormous outrage against the Muslim community, because we all know there are good and bad and everything. What we do need to do is to stop the inflow and the influx, close the borders up. How would you feel about just closing those borders until we can get a handle on everything?
I think that there's some merit to be said about hitting the pause button on any kind of immigration in the short term. The one thing that came to mind that we haven't talked about yet that plays into this is we're still funding some of these nations with mass amounts of foreign aid.
Yeah.
And so you can make the argument that it's the American taxpayer that's funding ISIS, and some of those foreign aid dollars are likely flowing straight into the coffers of the people who are trying to kill us.
Look, real numbers, we've spent over $4.5 billion since 2011 aiding the Syrians and the refugees. $4.5 billion. And that's not including the billion that we spend every year from the voluntary agencies, the NGOs that come in and they help to resettle these people. We are by far one of the most generous people in the world. But there comes a point when you're starting to risk the lives of your family and friends by allowing refugees to come in here that cannot be properly vetted, just like this woman was out in San Bernardino. I mean, she came in on a visa, and she wasn't properly vetted. They've already admitted that. How do you stop this?
Well, I did some homework for a piece that I wrote a couple of weeks ago. And if memory serves correctly, the Department of Homeland Security immigration offices, the last numbers I could find, Bob, that had come into the United States via both permanent and temporary visas was about 280,000 from predominantly Muslim countries. Okay, that's Middle East and Africa. Now, we don't know. There's no way to know who the bad people are and who the good people are. But we do know that between 75 and 80% were single men of military age. Now, that doesn't seem, or at least that's my understanding of the data, and that doesn't seem to fit the profile of that
saving families?
Refugee family
right.
Argument that comes in. And so that is one of those pieces of data that I think supports the notion that you're putting forward, which is maybe we just take a pause right now and try to get things under control.
Well, even from an economic viewpoint, we've got 11 million illegal aliens already here that have crossed the southern border or the northern border. We don't know where most of those are. We don't know how many have crossed over that are part of this group of terrorists, and we know they're out there. The government knows they're out there. I mean, they're following thousands of them. But when you take a look at the damage that they're doing to our economy here, when we have a labor participation rate that's down in the low 60s, and I'm talking 62, 63%, the lowest since 1970s, that, again, is telling me that we're not doing the right thing to protect the people of the United States, not just from terrorism, but from the economic terrorists that are going on, from the unemployment that we have in this country. And it's happened because we've allowed too many illegals to come in here and take jobs from the Americans and allow too many jobs to flow out to other countries.
Well, I don't know. There's no way to know what that economic impact is, but I think in part it's not just the entitlements per se, or it's not just one particular program. It's the use of the roads, it's the use of the healthcare system, it's the use of the education system, and
sure.
the list goes on. And those are all things we need to be mindful of. That said, I for one am not such a hardline person that, hey, look, if there is truly a circumstance where we can validate someone is fleeing for their life. I mean, I don't want to just say permanently I stand for absolutely drawing a hard line on everything. However, we are in a crisis within our country, and there is not appropriate leadership to deal with it. There's not even policies. As we talked about earlier, we're not even acknowledging we're at war. And until that gets sorted out, until we have some kind of criteria that we can validate, I do believe that we need to take a much harder stand on who comes and who doesn't.
Well, I agree with you. The leadership we have currently is not doing the job, but it starts at the state level and works its way through the federal level. And I think it's important to understand that we've seen a bunch of governors, a group of governors, who have said, no, we are not going to allow any more Syrians in our state, period. End of story. And I'm sure if they had to, they would block it. Or they would go and they would not allow them to to immigrate or migrate into their states. What bothers me is the ones that do allow it, and California is one of those great states. They allow everybody to migrate there. Take a look at what's going on over the last 15 or 20 years with the population of illegals in California. And then again, take a look at the terrorist attack that took place there. You know, these things don't happen, you know, by happenstance. A lot of this is planned. A lot of this is part and parcel of what our enemies are looking for. They want to scare the living daylights out of us so they can depress the economy even more than it's depressed now.
Well, they have a strategy, and we don't.
Well, agreed.
And so, you know, one of the first things about accomplishing any objective is you have to have a planned out strategy, and it goes right back to what we've been talking about. That doesn't exist here. Our leadership isn't even acknowledging the fact that we have a problem in some cases. And when they do, it's the guns. It's the, you know, ready too ready of access to weapons. So we're backward.
Well, I'll tell you, I think we're going nowhere fast with this president. We've only got another year to deal with them, fortunately. Hopefully we get somebody in there that's going to have a plan for this country to move forward. Because right now, what's going on in Washington is total gridlock, and they scare the living daylights out of most of Americans. Not because they're not doing anything, it's because when they do something, it's usually the wrong thing. And that's what really bothers everybody.
You know, I had one other thought here just now. And this would need to be something that would need to be driven at a federal level, but I heard a pundit on one of the news channels make an argument of, if you took all the money, or just a portion of the money that we are spending on bringing the refugees into the United States, and you created a sustainable refugee facility in North Africa someplace, A, you'd save money, B, you'd solve, or at least go a long way towards bringing the refugees here, and C, you'd provide a natural incentive for them to eventually return or have an incentive to make a go of it in their own region, as opposed to bringing them into the U.S. Well, and that hasn't been talked about very much.
No, it hasn't. And, you know, the costs, when you look at the costs, it costs 20 times more to import a refugee than to build the facilities and house them in their own country. But when you take a look at what the refugees are looking like, and you said it earlier, they're all young men that are military age. There's something wrong with this. And we're doing something wrong in the way we're allowing them in. Russ, I appreciate you spending time here today with us. I know you've got to get to a meeting.
My pleasure, Bob.
But thank you again.
It's always a pleasure.
We'll be talking again soon.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.